is the lady from
Oh, so you do, okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay, we're ready.
Oh, order. Samantha Dixon to move the motion.
Thank you. I beg to move that the House has considered the environmental impact of neonicotinoids and other pesticides. And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Henderson. And I'd like to thank all the members who have joined the debate today. I'd also like to thank everyone who signed the many petitions which have been linked to this debate, including a significant number of my constituents in Chester. I think it's clear that the support, or should I say the concern on this issue, is overwhelming. Before I start, I'd like to say that I will do my best to refrain from any bee puns. On the 18th of January this year, the government approved emergency authorisation for the use of the highly damaging neonicotinoid on sugar beet for the fourth year in a row, going against the advice of their own advisers and the concerns of campaigners and environmentalists across the country. This decision is yet again ill-judged and wrong. It directly contradicts our national and international obligations, such as the commitment to halt species loss by 2030 and the obligation under the Global Biodiversity Framework to reduce the overall risk from pesticides by at least half. These decisions are being made against expert advice. They're being waved through without a parliamentary vote, and they're being made on the basis that they're temporary and in a case of an emergency. Have we really had an emergency for 4 years in a row? Or is this just the government's way of nodding through harmful practice on a yearly basis? Yes, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for the City of Chester for securing this important debate. And sorry for intervening early, but I do have to go to a meeting, but I wanted to make my point. I'm a beekeeper myself, and I was recently speaking to the Somerset Beekeepers Association, who called the government's ongoing war on insects unfathomable. So does the Honourable Member agree that we must have rigorous testing of chemicals before they're approved for agricultural use, and that the government should introduce a clear qualitative target for significantly reducing the overall use of pesticides in agriculture?
I do agree, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention. I noted the BBC article last night entitled "Bee Harming Neonicotinoid Use Makes a Mockery of the Ban." There is no doubt that there is an issue with yellow virus, but we are facing a biodiversity emergency, and lifting the ban is not the way forward. We've got to find another way. And I support the calls made in the article by Richard Benwell, the Chief Executive of Wildlife and Countryside Link, for the government to urgently deliver its long-awaited strategy on sustainable pesticide use. Bees and other pollinators have for many years been facing an increasingly difficult task in the face of changing agricultural practice, which of course is a challenge in itself for our farming community, but can also lead to a decrease of available forage and produce monoculture deserts for much of the year, making insect existence increasingly challenging. It's well known that neonic pesticides can be very harmful to a wide range of insects and invertebrates, including, of course, our beloved bees. They affect the nervous systems of bees and other insects, resulting in paralysis and eventually death. In fact, author and academic Professor Dave Goulson has warned that just 1 teaspoon of this type of chemical is enough to kill 1.25 billion honeybees. That's equivalent to 4 lorry loads. Environmentalists, campaigners and local beekeepers have been in touch with me ahead of today's debate to share their views and concerns on this topic, including the Wildlife Trust, our own Chester Zoo, and Ang Harad, a beekeeper in the local area, who kindly alerted me to a report by the Expert Committee on Pesticides, which states that there is new evidence regarding the risk from neonics globally, which adds to the weight of evidence adverse impact on honeybee behaviour and demonstrated negative impacts on bee colonies. Bees play a crucial role in our food supply chain by pollinating crops, and their decline can have cascading effects on biodiversity and agricultural productivity. We should be protecting them, not putting them in harm's way. Insect populations have suffered drastic declines in the UK. Recent evidence suggests we've lost 50% or more of our insects since 1970, and 41% of the Earth's remaining 5 million insect species are threatened with extinction. Of course, other human factors and habitat loss are also to blame, but so is the widespread use of neonics. And with a third of our food crops pollinated by insects, we have a lot to lose. Government's emergency authorisation allows seed coating of sugar beet crops with neonics, a method of application that results in only 5% of the pesticide reaching the crop. The rest accumulates in the soil, where it can be absorbed by the roots of wildflowers and hedgerow plants visited by bees, or can leach into watercourses and affect wildlife that lives there. If we thought sewage in our waterways wasn't enough, we are also adding harmful chemicals into the mix. Harmful neonics have now been found in more than 10% of English rivers, despite a widespread ban of these chemicals in 2018. In more than half of the rivers where neonics were detected, they were at levels which posed a significant risk to wildlife. I back our farmers, and I'm concerned that sugar beet farmers are experiencing a difficult time. However, lifting the ban is not the way forward. In fact, DEFRA's own economic analysis found there was little impact of the beet yellow virus on sugar beet yield in untreated crops. Yes, of course.
Pollinators, which is obviously the subject of the debate, particularly are important, but also what about human health as well? Norfolk County Council is the first council, I think, in the country that's banned glyphosate, which I think is an important move forward, and perhaps she will give me her thoughts on that. But more importantly, should we not be trying to find naturally produced, sustainable products that are not just harmful, that are not harmful for pollinators, but also for human health as well, and trying to repeat what's happened with Norfolk County Council and glyphosate? We should be rolling this out and putting all our scientific efforts into trying to find those products for the future.
I couldn't agree more with the honourable gentleman. In fact, it underlines the importance of the strategy coming forward for the use of all pesticides. So thank you for his intervention. We must find a science-led way forward that protects our bees and safeguards our future diversity and human health, but also supports the farming sector by supporting initiatives that promote alternative bee-friendly pesticides and sustainable farming methods. Despite the emergency authorisation being granted in 2022 and 2023, the proportion of farmers who decided against using neonics was 29% and 40% respectively. This shows that an increasing number of growers are trying to farm in a way that does not harm nature or rivers, yet there appears to be no support for these growers from the industry or government. Government has instead focused on short-term solutions that will undermine the long-term sustainability of the farming sector and disadvantage those growers trying to do the best for nature. Emergency pesticide authorisation not only risks the floodgates to open on other harmful pesticide use, but also risks slowing down crucial research on the alternatives. Without these alternatives, climate change will only lead to the increased demand for neonics. The use of pesticides in the agricultural industry has become commonplace for many years, and there are good cases to support the use of targeted pesticide to help secure successful food production. However, some of these treatments are not being used in a targeted way and are affecting beneficial pollinators as well as pest species. Yes, of course.
Thank you once again from the Honourable Member for giving way. Scientists increasingly believe that there's no safe level of pesticides for humans to be exposed to. And there's growing evidence that pesticides become more harmful when they're combined together, known as that kind of cocktail effect. I spoke to an arable farmer last summer who told me he would never allow his children to eat bread made with his wheat. When I challenged him on it, he simply said, well, I know what's gone into it, don't I? So does the Honourable Member agree with me that the government needs to regulate, incentivise and support farmers to lead on the transition away from pesticide use?
Yes, I would agree, and I think the Honourable Lady makes a very compelling case, which I hope the Minister is listening to. The widespread impact of the use of these pesticides is not looking to target known pest species, but rather being used as a blanket catch-all that preloads the crops with deadly chemicals, as the Honourable Lady has mentioned, that can transfer into the pollen and nectar and can transfer into the food chain. We must look for positive alternatives and not settle for short-term harmful solutions. Therefore, I ask the Minister if he will comment on the assessment the government has made on the impact of their emergency authorisation of neonics for the past 4 years. Will he explain why the government has ignored expert advice which puts our vital pollinators under threat? And will he commit to any future decisions on this issue being put to a parliamentary vote? Finally, will he tell us all when the long-awaited strategy will be published? I'd like to thank all members who've joined today's debate. I know we're all busy bees with packed diaries, and I hope the rest of the debate will create a real buzz about this issue. I'm sorry, I really couldn't help myself. But on a serious note, nature has a critical role to play in both integrated pest management solutions and tackling climate change. But it cannot do this if it's under attack from harmful pesticides such as neonicotinoids. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the environmental impact of neonicotinoids and other pesticides. Called Jim Shannon.
Mr Chairman, thank you so much, and a real pleasure to serve under your chairship. Mr Chairman, can I first of all congratulate the Honourable Lady for Chester for setting the scene so very well on a subject matter that should really interest us all, and if it doesn't, then there's questions to be asked and reason why we're all here. Really a pleasure to see the Shadow Minister in his place, who's a deep love of farming, but especially, can I say, the Minister. Always here whenever debates are to be answered, and I know that he, like I, and like others in this room today, understands the importance of the subject. I declare an interest, Mr Chairman, not because I'm a beekeeper, but because my neighbours down the road, Chris and Valentine Hodges, they are beekeepers, and I let them a couple of years ago put some of their beehives in my land, because I wanted to see that enhancing the natural environment that I live in, and it quite clearly has. They have what's called a black bee species. It's almost extinct, and they're the people who are responsible for ensuring that the black bees are coming back in my farm, obviously, but in the constituency across the whole of the Ards Peninsula, up into North Down, and indeed as far over as the other side of Strangford Lough. By the way, the honey is absolutely gorgeous. Every morning before I leave my house, I have 2 spoonfuls on my brown toast. When you get to a certain age, fibre is very important. So the honey gives you that wee bit of flavour and that wee bit of taste, and thank the Lord for it. But it is really special. So I want to put that on record right away. I'm ever mindful of the responsibility that we hold to be good stewards of our environment. And I know that this is an obligation that our farmers honour in every sense. And all the farmers I know want to do that. I know the Minister does that, and other people who are here does the very same. For many farmers, they see themselves not as landowners, but as caretakers of the land for future generations. The Honourable Lady referred to that very clearly when she made her introductory speech. The responsibility of food production that is safe is something that is of great importance. For this reason, many old school farmers, as I'm probably one of those old school farmer, have encouraged their children to attend agriculture colleges to get a basis of generational knowledge, working hand in hand with modern techniques. To be taught how to get the most out of the land and diversify where necessary. Our agriculture colleges are vital to the future food security of this nation, and that should be also noted today as well. The complexity of grant applications and red tape, although somewhat reduced, is still a matter of concern to the farming community, and the need for the Ulster Farmers Union, the sister organisation of the National Farmers Union in England, is very clear. The two of them work together. They do give some of the best insurance rates that is possible, so maybe I'm a wee bit biased when it comes to that, and all my insurance is taken with the Ulster Farmers Union in particular. For that reason, in relation to this issue, I looked to see what the NFU view was on the issue, knowing that they have both hands-on knowledge and science at their fingertips, and I can understand the situation in which the use of these pesticides is important. Most recently, an application from NF Sugar and British Sugar for the emergency use of the seed treatment on sugar beet seed in 2024 has been approved by government, and this was indeed a vital application. I think we need to look at that, Mr. Chairman, and recognise why that was done and the implications of it. The authorisation has been granted on the condition that the product will only be used if the threshold of virus levels is reached. NFU Sugar Board Chairman Michael Sly said, and I quote, "The British sugar beet crop, which safeguards some 9,500 jobs, continues to be threatened by the virus yellows disease, a terrible disease that can do all sorts of damage to the countryside and to the bees in particular. In recent years, the disease has caused crop losses of up to 80%. Can't be ignored. Can't ignore those things. Those are facts, figures, and the stats. So I am relieved that this has been recognised by DEFRA and by the Minister here in particular in granting the derogation, which will be invaluable if we see a return of severe pest pressure. An independent scientific threshold is used to forecast the severity of pest pressure on the British sugar beet crop, and any seed treatment will only be used if the threshold is met. So there are conditions to it. It's not a wild abandonment of the process. It's very much controlled, and DEFRA have their hands, along with the sugar beet, British Sugar have it well under control. The industry will again deliver a comprehensive stewardship programme to ensure safe and responsible use of the treatment if the threshold is met. Led by the British Beet Research Organisation, the homegrown sugar industry is working hard to find viable long-term solutions to this disease. So it's about the long-term vision, how we do that and how we find the cure or the one that makes sure that doesn't do any more damage. I'm happy to, yes, I.
In my own comments, I'll be the first person to say that we need to look at insecticides and make them to be safer. But I think the point is, and I represent a constituency with a very large amount of sugar beet growth, is that this derogation is for a limited period of time on a non-flowering plant in its first year, which pollinators will not therefore be at risk from. And the fact that you are spraying the seeds of these of the plant actually mitigates a huge amount of risk. And I think the public don't fully appreciate that absolute key point.
Can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that intervention? That's a very salient and helpful intervention. I think it puts the facts on record, why it's been done, how it's been done, the controls that are necessary for it to happen, but also the reasons why it's necessary to do it as well. So I'm sure that nobody here would have any concerns over the way it's been done, how long it will last for, and the importance of it. The homegrown sugar industry is working hard to find a viable long-term solution to the disease. But it's imperative that we recognise the need that is there as well and the necessity for it. I conclude with this paragraph, Mr. Chairman. I think the issue of this application does show the level of thought it has to go into having an application approved by British Sugar. The use of these harsh chemicals are not the first solution. They are a final solution. And for this reason, I do believe that they should remain available, but always closely monitored. We owe a duty to our environment, and I believe that we also owe this duty to food security. And the balance is so delicate, but I believe it can be struck. It can be done. If the will is there, if there's a will, there's a way. I believe that in my heart. And I look to the Minister again, as I always do, to ensure that we in this House are doing the best we can and put the garden back in the shape that it should be. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Henderson. And I'd like to thank my more friend for Chester for introducing this debate in the way that she has. There are strong supporters for bees and pollinators in all parties, and the way that my more friend introduced this debate, I think, set out clearly that there is a real, genuine concern amongst the people we represent about the continued use of emergency authorisations on bee-killing pesticides for sugar beet crop. Having called similar debates in previous years, I'm hugely passionate about this issue. I bloody love bees, and I am desperately concerned that the concern that the public have about bees isn't being reflected in government policy. It's not being reflected in the way the government follows expert advice, and it's not being reflected in the way that it's treating this House on an issue that it knows matters to nearly every single member of Parliament here. Bees... Oh, happy giving way.
Honourable Member for giving way. Just when he's on the point of greater awareness, would he agree with me that not only amongst the beekeeping fraternity, but amongst the wider community that sometimes don't understand the importance of beekeeping and what it contributes to wider society, that debates like this will be essential and very helpful in broadening and widening the knowledge amongst the 95% of the public who just take beekeeping as a small, almost irrelevant pastime and don't see the importance of it?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention. Beekeeping is a pastime that's enjoyed in rural and urban areas. And it is something that matters. It's not just the production of a local produce. It's helping support an ecosystem that we all depend on for vibrant, beautiful gardens through to the food that we eat. And what matters to bees, well, it should matter to us all because it affects every single one of us. Bees, along with other pollinators, play a crucial role in our ecosystems. The decline in bee populations affects not only our country's biodiversity, but also our food security as well. I think it's of paramount importance that we, as politicians, take this issue more seriously. 1/3 of the UK bee populations have disappeared in the last decade, and the UK has already lost 13 out of our 35 native bee species. That should give us pause for thought as to what are we doing to safeguard those remaining species? What are we doing to safeguard the remaining ecosystems? How are we not only protecting habitats from being lost, how are we increasing the amount of available habitats for insects, for pollinators, for nature? Now, I've listened intently over many, many years, from when I sat in the front bench where my friend from Cambridge is now, to where I sit now, hearing ministers talk about the importance of nature-based recovery, the importance of encouraging more of our farmers to take nature-based solutions to heart. I welcome that change in language. I think that is an important policy shift that we've seen in recent years. But if we are to make it real, if we are to really deliver that nature-based solution, emergency authorisations for bee-killing pesticides can simply not sit alongside that approach. It is something that's incongruous with it. Continuing use of bee-killing pesticides amounts to environmental vandalism. Now, Mr Hanson, I back British farmers. My two little sisters, one's a farmer and the other one works in agricultural products. It matters. I represent an urban constituency in the southwest, but I know just how important farming is to the southwest of England, to our rural communities, because without farmers, there is no food. And it is really important we understand that. So I back their concerns, and I understand that there's a real issue around the viability of some crops that are affected by certain diseases that the emergency authorisations are seeking to address. But I'd like to just, if I can, look at the emergency authorisations, because the government said when we left the European Union that they would follow the evidence, that they wouldn't be making decisions without the evidence. Now, a very prominent former Environment Secretary might not have been very happy and kind about experts, but actually, DEFRA have said that on a number of occasions, but they're not following it here. And I would like to understand from the Minister why they're not following the advice of their expert group, and to be clear about at what point are they expecting to be back on track with that? Do they have alternative science that gives a different perspective from their expert group? What guidelines have they given to the experts in terms of commenting on these authorisations? Because I think it is really important that we now recognise that we're on the 4th year in a row that there's been emergency use allowed for neonicotinoids. Now, I think if we are to look at the words in that emergency use, I really doubt it's an emergency 4 years in a row. I echo the words from my colleague from Chester. 4 years in a row is not emergency use. 4 years in a row is a pattern which has allowed a type of behaviour to continue. If it was an emergency, 1 year's worth of emergency use, activity to correct that would have taken place. In the first of these debates that I called a number of years ago, I had a government minister, not the one that's in his place now, but one of his predecessors, tell me that these were temporary emergency authorisations that would only last 3 years at most. We're now in the 4th year of those temporary emergency authorisations. And I'm not certain, from anything I've seen from the government, whether there would not be, if they are re-elected at the election, a 5th, a 6th, a 7th emergency authorisation, because I don't get the sense that there is a destination that the minister is driving us towards. And what I'd like to see is a clear destination. Happy giving way to him.
I think it's an important point that he is making, and it may be helpful to the House to understand, of course, there is the, if you like, the authorisation for the emergency use, but there is the further check and balance upon that if the threshold is met in order for that product to be deployed. And it's only in the circumstances where that threshold is met that the product is deployed into the open market. So in 2021, that threshold was not met, and so the product was not deployed in the open market, and it was felt not necessary. So the science basically said, where there is an issue and a challenge, we will use the product. Where there isn't, as in 2001, that product will not be allowed.
I thank the Minister for that, and I agree with him about the thresholds. But it doesn't nonetheless distract from the ability of government to have effectively established a baseline that every year they will authorise emergency use of neonicotinoids, notwithstanding that that emergency use is, in the use of it, subject to a threshold being met. But I don't see how we can be in the 4th year of an emergency without there being some urgent and emergency action taken to address it. I think it would be kinder and more honest in this debate to say the government has a standing policy now that authorises the use of bee-killing pesticides for sugar beet crop, but there is a threshold that has to be met. That, for me, would seem to be a more honest appraisal, because after 4 years, it is a reality that this is authorised every year, and I don't think it should be in relation to that. Happy giving way.
Sympathetic to a lot of the points that he's making, but on that particular point, does he not think that's actually a fairly reasonable position to get to in the absence of an alternative to neonics? Because one of the things that hasn't been discussed in this debate, it's important, is there is at the moment no currently viable alternative to neonics to use when that threshold has been met. And until we're in that position, then that may well be the reasonable course of action to take.
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention, and one of the advantages or disadvantages from having spoken and called a debate on the use of neonics is that I have listened to a number of ministers cycle through the arguments why each and every year it's justified. And so in one of the earlier debates, the argument was put, we need to use an emergency authorisation because the new crop species are not yet online. In another debate, a minister said we need to use emergency authorisation because the insurance scheme that effectively, with sugar beet growers, that would support those growers where there is disease in the crop, isn't yet online. Well, those were many years ago, and what we need to see is honesty and transparency in this debate, because I think what he is saying is it would be reasonable, I'll come to you in just a second, it would be reasonable to argue for that if these things happen. And what I am saying to the Minister is we now have a standing policy. So let's just be honest that it is a standing policy that bee-killing pesticides are used on an annual basis subject to a threshold. Then we can debate whether that standing policy, the reality of the policy that is being given by government is right, and what are the alternatives. Because at the moment, the annual reauthorisation against the expert advice of the government's own scientific body doesn't support that position that we should be allowing this to be used on an annual basis. I've been giving way to him.
I thank the opportunity for giving way, but if I give him, I suppose, a medical analogy, I'm a doctor and a practicing doctor, as he was aware. Now, I may, for example, prefer certain medications over others, and I may recognise that some medications I may prescribe have unpleasant side effects, and I'd wish there was an alternative to that medication that might be in development, But at this moment in time, I only have that option available to me in my prescription repertoire to make the patient actually better. And that's a similar situation to here, what we're facing with the use of neonics. So I think the issue here is really to ask the Minister about what's being done to accelerate finding alternatives to neonics that are effective. Because that's really the question we need to ask here, because we don't want to necessarily put farmers in a situation where the only viable alternative to treatment is completely banned.
Well, I thank him for that intervention again, and I'm not a doctor, so I won't try to butcher a health analogy that may be shot down quite easily. But I think what he is saying is we need to hear from the Minister why they're authorising it against expert advice, which they say they are following, which they are not, with a different excuse every year, and I would like to see with the destination of where we are going to get to. Because I believe we have a standing policy now from DEFRA that this is authorised every year. Doesn't necessarily mean, from what the Minister said in his intervention, it will be used every year, but it will be authorised every year. That is the standing policy, the reality that the majority of the years in this Parliament, the government has authorised neonicotinoids to be used in emergency cases. Well, I don't believe you can have a 4 years' worth of emergency. Indeed, if a patient came to you with an emergency 4 years in a row, I suspect you would challenge the use of the word emergency in that context. That's why I want to see it clear. What is the destination from government? What is their plan? What are their alternatives for the use of this? But, Mr Henderson, I don't only want to talk about farmers' use of neonicotinoids, because as this debate is about the broader use of neonicotinoids, I think it is also worth us, having established that neonics kill bees, having established that bees are essential for our ecosystem, having established the cross-party concern that exists about the government's use of bee-killing pesticides, we've established effectively that neonics are the problem. How they are deployed into our ecosystems is also a problem. So we've looked at the neonic deployment in relation to agriculture and sugar beets. But I want to raise about neonics in two other areas. One is neonics use in imported food for those countries where we have now signed trade deals that use neonics as standard in their agricultural production. How are we safeguarding our ecosystem and our food supply against importing neonics in food, on coatings of food and in other agricultural products? Because we know that neonics, when exposed to a natural environment, get everywhere. Right? We've seen studies recently, as cited in The Guardian only a month ago, talking about neonics now appearing in a Swiss study in children, in every child that was tested in this study. So we know that neonics are present. We also know that neonics are present in our wildlife, in our rivers, as has been mentioned by the member for Chester, and in our wider ecosystems. So we need to look at how are we getting neonics into those things. So looking at where neonics are in imported food, but also I have a concern that neonics are being used in flea treatment far too frequently. And dog and cat owners, in an attempt to look after their pet, in an attempt to make the right decision, are using neonicotinoids. I'm going to butcher the phraseology of these chemicals, but fipronil and imid acloprid are two different types of neonics used in flea treatment. Now, we know the advice is you're supposed to use it on the back of your pet's neck, and you're not supposed to touch the pet until it is dry. In practice, we also know that those neonics and the effects of those neonics and the ability to spread it lasts for the duration of that flea treatment on those animals. And we're seeing more neonics going into our rivers and into our watercourses as a result of flea treatments. Now, at the moment, there is not enough focus on this area. So if we have established it as a concern for bees, we also need to understand what is the direction of travel here. Now, I don't come with a prescription that I'm going to ask the Minister to cut and paste into policy. I'm saying that there is an issue here. And I think it's important that we have an honest debate with members of the public who I believe are trying to do exactly the right thing by their pet. And I think many of them would be utterly horrified and aghast if they found out that actually in trying to do the right thing to support their pets, to prevent disease on that animal, that they're actually harming our wider ecosystem. But I do think there is a debate that's worth having here, just as the honourable gentleman suggested, a destination, an idea of how we address it. Because the authorisation for emergency use of bee-killing pesticides on sugar beet crop affects a certain part of the country primarily. It doesn't affect every single watercourse or every single river catchment area. But yet we're finding neonics in a wider variety of areas than just this bee-killing pesticide is being used. So it is incumbent upon all of us in making a strong case against bee-killing pesticides in agriculture that we also look at bee-killing pesticides that are used elsewhere. I mean, Professor Dave Goulson, who the honourable member from Chester mentioned in her remarks, who I've met at a bee round table that I hosted a year or so ago to talk about bee-killing pesticides, warns that flea treatment harms fish and invertebrates that live in our waterways. These are chemicals that were banned in agricultural use several years ago and remain banned in the UK for agricultural use, but allowed to be used in pet treatment. And I think that is a question mark that we have to look at. I've spoken about the human health impacts that I think are concerning that also need to be properly understood. And this is where I think it's incumbent on all of us that campaign on bees, all of us that love bees, to make sure that our answers to this are clear about where we need to see action. And in my mind, the emergency authorisations for bee-killing pesticides in agriculture should end. It should not be allowed, and I hope that when he gets to his feet, my honourable friend from Cambridge will be able to restate the position that he has done in every one of these debates that I have spoken in over the course of this Parliament and say that you should stop. But also being clear that there are other challenges that we need to look at, we need to investigate. So I'd like to hear from the Minister when he gets to his feet, perhaps, where else can we look at? What science is his department commissioning about the wider use of neonicotinoids and the pollution of those neonics into our wider ecosystem? I don't think any one of us has the answer here. But if we can agree on the problem, that will at least start getting us in a direction where we can start addressing it. I'd like to thank the campaigners that have been working on this, not only the wildlife trusts, those people that are championing insects. Apart from bees, insects get a pretty bad rap. There's not many charities that are really holding out for the daddy long leg, right? There really aren't. But insects, without them, there is a really significant impact on our ecosystem. So we do need to see insects being championed much more. They're not just scary, creepy crawlies. They're absolutely essential for a vibrant ecosystem and for the nature-based recovery that we all want to see. I want to in particular to thank Annabelle Kindersley of Neil's Yard Remedies for her tireless campaigning on this matter. No debate would be able to happen without her continued pressure on MPs and encouragement for us to keep pushing further and further, because bees and nature matter. And if we're not having that constantly said, there's a risk that neonics, their wider use, becomes something that is just accepted, an annual occurrence in terms of the authorisation, something that passes without a parliamentary vote. In previous debates, I've spoken about the importance of a parliamentary vote, because when we are authorising something that damages our environment, and we know it does, that is against government advice, the principles of evidence-based policy making and following the science that the Minister has the Minister's Department have set out should dictate there should be an extra step before that is authorised. I think the reason we don't have a debate and a vote on authorising bee-killing pesticides in agriculture is very simple. The government would lose that vote each and every time. The opposition MPs would vote against it and their own MPs would vote against it. And that's why we don't have a vote on it. But that should in itself tell us a story about whether this is acceptable behaviour for it to be used. So these chemicals in this latest authorisation are being used against the expert advice from the government. It is ill-judged and wrong to do so. There has been no parliamentary vote on it, nor do I think the Minister wants a parliamentary vote on it. It will not happen. And I don't think you can have an emergency 4 years in a row without bigger action. That's why, whether we like it or not, bees are an election issue. They are something that matters to the voters that we all represent. They are something that are in decline across the country, despite the incredible efforts of local councils planting wildflower meadows and planting bee corridors, in terms of local people encouraging the use of hives, the amazing CIC in Plymouth, Pollinise, that put amazingly painted beehives all over our city, collecting the honey, supporting nature-based recoveries. Despite their work, we know that this is not working in the way that we want to. So it's not just the emergency authorisation of bee-killing pesticides, it's something else as well. It is habitat loss, it is wider use of neonics in our economy, and we have to look at all of those. I look forward to hearing from the Minister, but I also look forward to hearing from my friend for Cambridge, so it can be absolutely clear that these bee-killing pesticides would not be authorised if there were a change in government. I'd like to encourage him to go in that direction in terms of the position that he takes on this matter. And I think if that were the case, there would be a greater focus on the issue the gentleman opposite mentioned about finding alternatives, finding better ways of supporting our farmers that are affected by this. Because it's not all farmers, it's some farmers, and they do deserve support. But that is what would happen in an emergency. If it was a genuine emergency, it would be all hands on deck to try and solve this matter. 4 years later, it's still not all hands on deck. 4 years later, we're still here having emergency authorisations passed through without a parliamentary vote, and bees are still dying. That's why this needs to change. That's why we need a change of approach here. I look forward to hearing from the Minister and the Shadow Minister about what that approach should be. Thank you, Mr Henderson.
With you in the chair, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the member of the City of Chester, for securing this debate. Her introduction was very full, very thorough, and I will echo many of her points. I'm also grateful for the speakers. I'm sorry the member for Strangford has left us. I've long wondered what he was on to keep him going, and now we know the answer. 2 spoonfuls of honey on a piece of toast in the morning. We'll all have to try that. But I was particularly taken, obviously, with the comments from my very good friend, my honourable friend, the member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport. His passion for bees is legendary, and he raised a series of important points in his speech, many of which I'll touch on. I thought that the exchange between himself and the Minister was illuminating on the threshold issue. I fear, because of the weather this year, we're likely to be across that threshold level again. So in reality, we are talking about a derogation that will actually be applied this year. And I thought his points about the flea treatment for pets, I think, is an issue that will rise up and up in salience. It clearly is a significant problem. But the key point is we're here again. Fourth time, it's almost an annual debate, the annual neonicotinoids debate. It really is a case of deja vu. We're also, of course, still waiting for the National Action Plan on pesticides. I think I've been doing this brief for 4.5 years now, and Josie Cohen and others from the Pesticide Action Network have been pressing me on this point all the way through. And I think I've lost count of the changes in terminology. So if the Minister can't give us a date, perhaps he could tell us whether it's soon, imminent, or in due course, or maybe just possibly after the election. Who knows? But there's a serious point here. Why on earth has it taken so long to deal with all of these issues that have already been raised in the debate today? And why can't we find a way forward? And of course, how many times is it the government has ridden roughshod over that expert opinion by allowing yet another emergency authorisation for the use of Cruiser B? We've already heard the answer. It's 4 times. And as my honourable friend has said, that hardly constitutes an emergency, because once again, the government's ignored the advice of government scientific advisors on the UK Expert Committee on Pesticides. Back in September, they said they were not able to support an authorisation for Cruiser SB because, and I quote, the potential adverse effects to honeybees and other pollinators outweigh the likely benefits. And they're right. They're right. We simply cannot afford to allow further devastation to the number of bees in this country. My honourable friends already quoted the statistics. 1/3 of the UK bee population disappearing in the last decade. Since 1900, 13 of 35 native bee species lost. A dramatic decline in the number of all pollinators, falling by over 50% between 1985 and 2005. And this is a fundamental threat to the survival of a much-loved part of our natural world. Not only a threat that we should challenge for its own sake, the consequences are economic and severe. Quite frankly, we would struggle to survive without bees. They're crucial to our physical health and the health of the wider environment. In the UK alone, approximately 75% of our crop species require pollination, and around 70 crops depend on or benefit from bee pollination. And while, of course, there are other methods of pollination, wild bees can pollinate on a much bigger and more efficient scale than the alternatives. The economic benefits are estimated to be worth approximately £690 million to the UK economy in terms of the value of the crops they pollinate. From a global perspective, bees pollinate 70 out of the top 100 foods we eat, and astonishingly, it's calculated 1/3 of every mouthful of food we consume, also essential for the crops used for animal feed. Without them, it would be harder to produce much of our meat, egg and dairy products. And I'm told that in China, they've had to resort to pollinating fruit trees by hand because pollinators have been nearly wiped out by pesticide use. And that should serve as a warning to us. And estimates suggest it would cost UK farmers an incredible £1.8 billion a year to manually pollinate their crops. So without bees, it wouldn't be long before our ecosystem was in very severe trouble. Now, not only are they in more danger every year, they're also more important every year. According to the UN, the volume of agricultural production dependent on pollinators has increased globally by 300% in the past 50 years. And the UN also found that greater pollinator density results in better crop yields, so it's also good for farmers. Now, these pesticides are not only toxic for bees, but are also, at certain levels, toxic to aquatic life and build up in river systems. Now, research by the Rivers Trust and Wildlife and Countryside Link found neonicotinoids in more than 1 in 10 English river sites tested by the Environment Agency. And the level of neonicotinoid in many of our rivers were above the environmental quality standard deemed safe for aquatic wildlife. Rivers most affected by the pesticides were found in the east of England, southeast England, West Midlands, in rivers including the Ivel, Waveney, Nene, Ouse and Thames. So the evidence is pretty clear. And it's no surprise then that other countries are heeding the advice of their experts on banning these pesticides. A European High Court ruling last year found that no derogation concerning seeds treated with neonicotinoids was justified, including in exceptional circumstances, the circumstances that were being invoked to protect sugar beet. The French government announced on the 24th of January 2023 that it had decided not to pursue a further exemption for neonicotinoid use on sugar beet in light of the court ruling, effectively putting an end to the emergency use of 3 banned substances, imidacloprid, clethodim and thiamoxin in Europe. So we're going the opposite direction to scientific and legal consensus in comparable countries. But as rightly being said, and I absolutely recognise the problems growers face in combating diseases transmitted by aphids. I'm an East of England Member of Parliament. I absolutely understand the importance of the sugar beet industry to our region. Virus yellows, in particular, is the cause of significant yield losses. The National Farmers Union, as has been said, reports that for some it can be up to 50%, and I'd like to thank the NFU for their background briefing. The most complex and serious example is that spread by the peach potato aphid, and it is hard to control. Back in 2020, the sector lost 40% of the national sugar beet crop, bringing down the 5-year average yield by 25%. I was grateful to the NFU and British Sugar a few months ago. I met their representatives and representatives from the British Beet Research Organisation in Rougham, near Bury St Edmunds, and we stood in a field and we looked very closely at the impact of the disease on a variety of sugar beet plants. And it was an informative and chastening experience because one could see the damage that was being done to those plants. So I fully appreciate the challenge farmers face. But I also think that most farmers know that the use of this chemical is not going to be a long-term solution. And in fact, in 2023, 40% of sugar beet farmers in England chose not to use them, despite the authorisation allowing the use. And that's up from 29% in 2022. And many, of course, and this goes back to some of the discussions that were going on earlier, many have been able to successfully deploy integrated pest management systems. And there was an interesting piece in Farmers Weekly just a few weeks ago detailing the recommendations being made by BBRO, including a move to more tolerant varieties. And I would say this is part of the issue here. It's an economic issue. The problem is that in moving to some of those more tolerant varieties, there is a yield penalty. It is a financial calculation. So what it tells us is that there are choices here. It can be done. The question is, do we choose to do so? So, Mr. Henderson, in conclusion, my view is the future will be different. And that's why I think so many people are currently exasperated and genuinely shocked by the government's continuing stance. The reaction to the government's latest decision to authorise the use of Cruiser SB has been damning. The Wildlife Trusts called it a death blow for wildlife, a backward step in evidence-based decision-making, and a betrayal of farmers who are producing food sustainably. The Chief Executive Officer of Wildlife and Countryside Link said the decision, quote, flies in the face of ecological sense. But it's not just environmental and wildlife groups who are outraged. And my honourable friend has already referenced the campaigning work done by Annabel Kindersley, Chief Executive of Neal's Yard, who helped to establish the Save the Bees campaign, a campaign with a number of businesses that has repeatedly called for an end to the use of bee-killing pesticides. And that's partly because they see the threat to bees as a threat to their businesses. And in the modern world, that is the challenge, not just to produce food, but to produce it in an environmentally sustainable, nature-positive way. I acknowledge that that's hard, and we may need new tools to help us, but change has to come, and it should start now, with an end to the use of these toxic chemicals in our fields.
I call on the Minister to respond.
Thank you, Mr Henderson. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I, of course, draw attention to my register of members' interests as a farmer, although I should be clear that we don't and have never produced sugar beet at home. And I also thank honourable members for their contributions this afternoon. I think it's been an interesting debate, and I think we do agree on more than we disagree on, and the necessity to find a way forward, of course, I wholly subscribe to. So, decisions to allow or not to allow the use of pesticides are based on careful scientific assessment of the risks. The aim is to achieve a high level of protection for people, for animals, for the environment, at the same time whilst improving agricultural production. The decision to grant the emergency authorisation of Cruiser SB was not taken lightly and was based on robust assessment of the environmental and economic risks and benefits. The emergency authorisation was issued with a strict threshold for use. The seed treatment was authorised to be used if, and only if, a virus incidence rate of 65% or more over the summer months was forecast by the independent model developed by the Rothamsted Research Institute. I can confirm that this forecast was made last Friday on the 1st of March. So the use of Cruiser SB on sugar beet in England will be allowed this year as yellow virus incident thresholds, as predicted by the Rothamsted model, has been met. Emerging sugar beet seedlings and young plants are vulnerable to feeding by aphids, which transmit several viruses, collectively known as virus yellows. These viruses lead to reduced beet size, lower sugar content, and higher impurities. We withdrew authorisation for the use of pesticide products containing 3 neonicotinoids on outdoor crops at the end of 2018. Now, since then, sugar beet growers have been adjusting to those new conditions. 2020 saw severe damage, with 24% of the national crop being lost, as the Shadow Minister also recognised. Many individual growers were severely affected, and less sugar beet was planted in 2001, as some growers were reluctant to take the economic risk in recent years, such as the virus threat has been relatively low. Now, this year, the threshold has been set at a predicted virus incidence of 65% or above. That is a slight increase from last year's threshold. This change reflects our improving understanding of the fit between the model used to predict virus incidence and the real-world outcomes. The aim of the threshold is to ensure that Cruiser is only used if there is predicted to be damage to the sugar beet production. Now, members will be aware of the strict conditions of use, which have also been set as the requirements of this emergency authorisation. As the threshold has been met and neonicotinoid treatment to seeds will be planted, these conditions are in place to mitigate risks to the environment, including risks to pollinators. Neonicotinoids take time to break down in the environment, and during this period, it may be taken up by flowering plants. So the conditions for use of Cruiser SB, therefore, only allow a limited range of crops, none of which flower before harvest, to be planted in the same field within 32 months of a treated sugar beet crop. Growers must also comply with a stewardship scheme. As part of this scheme, treated fields are monitored to determine the levels of neonicotinoids in the environment. Full details of the conditions of use have been published online. So, to be clear, we remain committed to the existing restrictions on neonicotinoids. Emergency authorisations are only approved where strict legal requirements are met. There must be special circumstances. Use must be limited and controlled, and the authorisation must appear necessary because of a danger that cannot be contained by any other reasonable means. Of course.
I wonder if we could just turn the question around and ask the Minister what would need to happen for him not to grant a derogation, because I can't really see the circumstances in which this is likely to change.
So I think there are circumstances in where that is likely to change. There are advancements in other products that are coming forward in the marketplace. I think the Gene Editing Act, as it is now, offers opportunity for research institutes to find alternative genetic possibilities to help improve resistance within the sugar beet plant itself to some of these pests and diseases. And in those circumstances, as those new technologies come forward, of course they'll be assessed in their merits as we move forward. And we're very keen to help and support that development of alternatives to try and help sugar beet producers and the environment at the same time.
Once again.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give way to the challenge.
As I said in my earlier speech, it is not that there aren't tolerant varieties already, alternatives available. It is that there's an economic cost. So I don't see really that's very different from the situation the Minister's just described. They won't necessarily provide the same level of yield. Even with the gene editing, there will still be a cost.
Well, let me give way to the honourable gentleman opposite, and I'll take both points at the same time.
I support what my friend has said, but I'm wondering, in relation to the reasons for Cruiser SB's authorisation, the Minister set out those. Could he also be equally clear about what the plan is to address it? Because if he set out clearly the reasons for it, can he be set out with equal clarity what measures are being taken, how those measures are being assessed, how we as parliamentarians who are interested in it can scrutinise the progress against those measures, so we are not here next year having a same debate with these same possible alternatives, but yet not having them in action? Is there ability for him to set that out with a reply to members here or as a written ministerial statement so we can see what the actual plan is that his department's pursuing?
So the plan in which we're pursuing, of course, is working with the sector, with the scientific community to try and bring those advancements forward as soon as is possible. It's not possible for me to stand here today and predict what those advancements may be in the next 12 months or the next 5 years. So I think, clearly we do have to work with the sector. British Sugar are putting an awful lot of work into trying to improve sugar beet growing in terms of their practice and products that are available. So just to return to the point that I was making, that the aim of the threshold, of course, is to ensure that Cruiser will only be used if there is predicted to be a danger to the sugar beet crop. And those if you like, standards and criteria have been met at this moment in time. Now, there must be, of course, special circumstances, and use must be limited and controlled, and the authorisation must appear necessary because of the danger that cannot be contained by any other reasonable means, as I was saying. This emergency authorisation allows a single use of neonicotinoid on a single crop under very strict conditions to mitigate the risk to those pollinators. Now, my decision was informed by the scientific advice of DEFRA's Chief Scientific Advisor, the Health and Safety Executive, and the UK Expert Committee on Pesticides. I also considered economic issues informed by analysis from DEFRA economists. The scientific advice concluded that, with the proposed conditions of use, there were no concerns for human health in respect of environmental risk. Potential risk to bees were considered in particular detail. HoC concluded that a number of potential risks to bees, including acute risks to bees from all routes of exposure, were not of concern for this use of thiomethoxam under the proposed conditions of use. Further advice from the Chief Scientific Advisor was that remaining risks, including those from following crops, were likely to be acceptably low with the conditions of the use proposed. So in taking the decision, we have wanted to be as transparent as possible and give access to the information that was considered during this decision-making process. So we've published documents outlining the key elements involved in making this decision, which can be accessed on gov.uk. This includes the HSE Emergency Registration Report, where members can access the full HSE risk assessment. So looking to the future, we do not wish to see the temporary use of neonicotinoids continue longer than is strictly required. The development of alternative, sustainable approaches to protect sugar beet crops from these viruses is absolutely paramount. Now, this includes the development of resistant plant varieties, as I was saying, measures to improve crop hygiene and husbandry, and alternative pesticides. British Sugar, plant breeders and the British Beet Research Organisations are undertaking a programme of work developing these alternatives. The government is closely monitoring the progress of this, and in January the government provided £660,000 towards a precision breeding project to develop resistance to virus yellows in sugar beet, helping to expedite the transition away from neonics in the future. In addition, the government recently held a roundtable with members of the British sugar industry and environmental organisations to discuss the industry's progress on implementing those alternatives. Now, I've urged British Sugar and others in the sector to drive forward these plans so that their outputs can be implemented in the field at pace. And this afternoon's discussion gives us an opportunity to recognise the need to develop alternative, sustainable approaches to tackling these plant diseases. And the government is fully committed to the agricultural transition, to repurpose the land-based subsidies we inherited from the EU. And these did very little for the environment, but also very little for farmers. That's why we're delivering on a new and ambitious system that rewards farmers and land managers for their role as environmental stewards, which starts with the Sustainable Farming Incentive. Last year saw the rollout of the Sustainable Farming Incentive, which includes the introduction of paid integrated pest management actions, specific actions to support more sustainable pesticide use, including paying farmers to carry out assessments and produce integrated pest management plans, establishing and maintaining flower-rich grass margins, blocks or infield strips. And payments are not only for not using insecticides as well, or for planting companion crops. These actions are already supporting farmers to minimise the use of pesticides and to incentivise the uptake of alternative ways to control pests. Encouraging lower risk and alternative approaches to pest management will be a prominent feature of the National Action Plan on the Sustainable Use of Pesticides, which will be published shortly. So, in conclusion, Ms Henderson, I think I've outlined this decision. This decision was not taken lightly. The decision to allow the limited and controlled use of neonicotinoid-based pesticides on a single crop was one which was taken under the most robust scientific assessment. We'll continue to work hard to support our farmers and to protect and restore our vital pollinator populations. Of course, I'll give way before I sit down.
Luke Pollard.
I'm grateful for him giving away. I don't quite buy the argument he's been putting, but I was just wondering if he could just reflect momentarily before he concludes around the other use of neonicotinoids in our wider economy, including on flea treatment. Yes. I recognise that he might not have the answers in his folder in front of him, but whether this is an area that he could ask his officials to investigate, because I think we are at the start of exploration here, and I'd be grateful if he could set out the path as he thinks would be useful to explore it further.
Yeah, and of course, I'm more than happy to continue to explore that. It's actually interesting that he should raise that at this moment in time, because we are doing some work, and there's a statutory instrument coming on veterinary medicines and the deployment of veterinary medicines. So you'll be aware, some flea treatments require a veterinary prescription. Mm-hmm. Some can be done under the, if you like, jurisdiction of I hesitate to use the word, but an expert, so a pet shop where there is some expertise, and others can be bought simply off the internet. So there are different levels of that treatment. We do need to be very careful as a department that we make sure that the use of such products are of benefit to their pets, but also the impact they have on the environment. And of course, we will consider that robustly as we move forward. But I thank you for highlighting that today, and thank members for their contributions this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr Henderson, and thank you to the Minister, the Shadow Minister and other members for joining today. I'm not sure I'm particularly reassured. I think what I've heard is that as of Friday, growers may be spraying this particular chemical on their crops. And
would you forgive me if am I allowed to intervene? Because it's a point of clarification that the product is not sprayed. There is no aerial spraying of neonicotinoids at any point, and I wouldn't want to inadvertently mislead the House.
Samantha
Crops
Dixon.
are being treated with this particular chemical, which I find disconcerting. And I think, as I set out at the beginning of my comments this afternoon, the concern is shared by constituents and constituents of those up and down the country, that the chemical is being used in an emergency situation, which is actually becoming routine, I would suggest. I would also like to thank the member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport for broadening the debate into the area around the use of the chemical in pet treatments, and thank the Minister for his comments about how the government is considering addressing that. I would argue that an SI may not be the most appropriate way to do it, given that the wider concerns about neonicotinoids need to be aired, as he said, as transparently as possible. An SI is not perhaps the route that most of my constituents would want to see followed. I go back to the point I made earlier about the use of parliamentary time to consider these issues and to debate these issues. Hopefully, this time next year, we won't be debating this issue. Hopefully, it won't be necessary. Hopefully, alternative means of controlling the specific disease that has been referenced today will have been found. But I hope that everyone here understands how worried people are about the future health of the bee communities. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the environmental impact of neonicotinoids and other pesticides. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. We've got to do a few minutes there, haven't we?
Yeah.
Before you log on. Are you doing the next one?
I'm doing half of the next one, yes, and then Gavin will
Okay.
come in. So yeah, you want to stretch it?
When I'm going to shortly, I'll leave it just before we do the restart again.